Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Creeps and Creeps. My name is Shay. Yes, I understand that's a deviation from Cece. That is because my married name is extremely unique and I didn't want to get axe murdered. So I thought, let's come up with an alter ego. How fun, how quirky, how girl boss. Well, like everybody in my personal life was like,
why'd you call yourself Cece? Who's Cece?
And I was like, you know what? Let's just go with the old maiden name. So we're doing a switch up. Sorry. My name's Shay, just so we're all on the same page here. So on this one, I'm a little slow on the uptake, specifically because I kind of forgot that she was getting released on December 28th, 2023. Oopsies. But that's okay. Better late than never. We are going to be talking about the case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard and her mother, Deedee Blancharde. But first, before we get into everything, if you like this video by the end, subscribe would be cool. Liking the video would be cool. Commenting on the video would be super cool. If you didn't like it, sorry. Maybe you'll tune in next time and see if things have shaken up a little bit in the way you like. Otherwise, you know what? Thank you for trying. Let's get into it. Gypsy Rose Blanchard was born July 27th, 1991 to parents Rod and Deedee Blancharde in Slidell, Louisiana. They met when they were super young. Well, okay. One of them was super young. Rod was 17. Deedee was 24. So when Deedee got pregnant, Roy was like, well, shit, let me man up. And he turned to good old Southern boy mode and decided that he'd put a ring on that finger. So Deedee and him get married. Didn't really last long. He woke up apparently when he turned 18 and was like, actually, I don't know what I was thinking. Annulment, we're done. Bye. So within a few months, they were married, divorced. They were married and divorced quicker than there was time for Gypsy to fully cook in her mom's belly. Like, they were done by the time that she was born. But Rod is actually, allegedly, I don't know, a pretty good guy, and he wound up sticking around for Gypsy and was extremely involved, apparently, according to all sources. And even once he got married, he had 2 other kids. He kind of had this other family where he could truly just like peace out and go to the new family. But no, he loved his daughter. And so until the day she turned 18, he sent her those $1,200 a month child support checks and actually did everything within his power to support Gypsy as well as he could, even though she wasn't living with he and his new wife, Christy. So when Gypsy was about 3 months old, Deedee started to notice that she might have some problems breathing. She said that she would catch Gypsy at night struggling to breathe and just stopping breathing. And so she went, oh shit, she has sleep apnea, and immediately contacted Rod and was like, call the fire brigade, we need to get this girl figured out. So they go and do the full gambit of all sorts of testing on Gypsy, and they couldn't find anything wrong with her. No one really knew what the hell Deedee was talking about, and Rod was there for some of them. He's like, well, what are you saying, lady? She's clearly fine. Gypsy had a lazy eye, but that was it. It's not going to cause a breathing machine to be busted out. So 3 rounds of sleep testing later and a breathing monitor, she wound up having to be put on a breathing machine, like a CPAP machine, at home, despite the fact that there was no direct evidence that Gypsy was actually sick. They just kind of went off Deedee's word. Deedee had been a nurse's aide, so she was super good at being kind of like in her scammer bag a little bit. She was really good at essentially being like, oh no, that's sleep apnea, and I know that because big medical words. And the doctors seemed to essentially get so overwhelmed that they were like, fuck it, fine. You know your kid best. Cool beans. Let's get her that old sleep machine. But aside from the lazy eye and the sleep apnea, until Gypsy was a toddler, she kind of seemed normal. Everyone in her family basically said that she was a super vibrant child, super friendly, super sweet, seemed smart. Nobody had any concerns other than Deedee. But then seemingly one day without explanation, all of a sudden Gypsy's just smacked with all of these medical conditions. She was having multiple seizures a month. She had asthma. She had MS, the muscular dystrophy. She had leukemia. She had it all. And things were not going well for her, as according to Deedee. Around this time as well, she kind of started to pull back visitation between Gypsy and Rod. Rod could still visit Gypsy, but he was not to be left alone with her for whatever reason. So weird. We'll get into that. So Rod's like, okay, well, I've been there at doctor's appointments and doctors say she's chilling, so what the hell's going on? And Deedee's like, oh, it's a chromosomal disorder, you wouldn't understand. And Rod, he didn't have any medical experience, and he just assumed, okay, well, Deedee does. And she seems to know Gypsy best. She's full-time taking care of her, so sure, like, who is he to dispute this fact that he was presented by Deedee. So because Deedee said that Gypsy was suffering from leukemia and muscular dystrophy, she was relegated to a wheelchair because I don't know a whole heck of a lot about MS, but I do understand that it really does cause a breakdown of your muscles, and it can make it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to stand and walk around. So her mom said, to the wheelchair with you, even though Gypsy at that time didn't really seem to have any difficulties walking. Gypsy also had a feeding tube installed that had to be swapped out every 6 months, and I learned, allegedly, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm always down to know new things, but from what I researched, it's basically an unanesthetized procedure where it fucking hurts. From what I understand, I don't know. The only tubes I've ever had were a drainage tube after a heart surgery. I've never had a feeding tube, thank God. It was kind of shitty. Gypsy was going downhill super quick. Deedee also decided that it was high time to start shaving Gypsy's hair because it was gonna fall out anyway. So poor Gypsy had to go her entire childhood into adulthood bald. I guess Deedee thought she was doing right by her child, allegedly. We'll get into that. So as these conditions are stacking up on each other, Gypsy winds up having to go to like a slew of medical professionals because essentially every time that a doctor was like, we don't know what's wrong with your kid, Deedee was like, there is something wrong. So she would just bounce out from that doctor, go find a new one, and essentially try and get confirmation that, yeah, her child had something wrong with her and validate what she was going through. Now, seeing all these doctors led to a slew of procedures that Gypsy had to go through, including the removal of her salivary glands because apparently she was drooling too much, according to Deedee. Then it was either that or medications caused her teeth to rot out, and then she got dentures installed. I don't know if you guys have seen any videos about Gypsy, but when she talks, her voice is extremely high-pitched. She genuinely does sound like a little kid.
Happy endings are not just in fairy tales, they're real and true in real life also.
And Deedee used that shit to her advantage because she started running around telling everyone that Gypsy had the mental capacity of a 7-year-old and like couldn't understand broader concepts outside of a 7-year-old's mind. Keep that in mind. But Gypsy was kind of in her own world anyway. She was super into cosplay, super into dressing up. I guess she really related to Rapunzel because she started to feel trapped in her own world, in her own little bubble. She was being bubble boyed essentially because her mom had such a tight grip on her to try and keep her daughter safe, allegedly, that Gypsy couldn't have friends. She couldn't have a boyfriend. She couldn't maintain stable relationships with anybody. So because of this, she kind of started to go into like Disney cosplay and stuff of that nature. Between August 23rd to August 31st, 2005, a Category 5 hurricane ravaged New Orleans, Louisiana, kind of the lower area of America. If you were alive at that time, you probably remember just how destructive it was. Like, it was really fucking bad. A total of over 1,800 lives were lost, and there was $145 billion worth of damage on the high end. That being said, there were two specific victims of Hurricane Katrina that we're going to go ahead and zero in on: Gypsy and Deedee. They were living in Slidell at that time, and they got fucked up during the hurricane. Like, they were going to Ronald McDonald houses, FEMA help centers. They were kind of going through it because Gypsy has all these medical conditions, and now all her medical records have been washed away in the storm, and they don't have their house anymore because that got completely floored, and things just aren't looking good for the ladies. Somehow, Habitat for Humanity got involved. They built Gypsy and Deedee a little pink house in Springfield, Missouri, and it had a little ramp that Gypsy could go up. It has a jacuzzi for Gypsy's muscles. They really did kind of think of as much as they could afford to put into the house, and it was a huge deal. There were news cameras everywhere. They had full interviews about it. It was a big thing. According to neighbors, Gypsy and Deedee were pretty chill neighbors. Deedee presented herself as a woman who was constantly going out of her way to help people. She was an ear to listen to people who needed her. Kind of a martyr, essentially. And Gypsy was this sad little wheelchair-bound, mentally deficient child that Deedee tried to make her present as, essentially. And I know that sounds harsh. We'll come back around to that verbiage in a second. But essentially, Deedee kind of got everyone to pity her and Gypsy instead of trying to kind of like bolster Gypsy up, which I'd found an article about that and I thought it was really interesting. It was essentially someone who's handicapped who presented the perspective of why was everyone so gassed up and excited about what a martyr Deedee was instead instead of looking at the big picture of why are you infantilizing this child and not helping her grow into a woman and encouraging growth mentally and physically, why are you clearly holding her back for your own benefit? I'll put the link in the description for that article. It's fascinating and it's really well written, so I recommend checking it out. But it's a really fascinating perspective on this case. But their new house wasn't the only thing that they were just gifted. They had met the likes of Blake Shelton, Miranda Lambert, Elijah Woods, and from what I understand, they had actually written them a check for $3,500. I don't know why, I couldn't really figure out why. I just saw that and I thought that was so interesting. But they were also gifted Disney tickets, they were given free flights to Gypsy's treatments and surgeries and stuff of that nature. And they were also getting bombarded with charitable donations. They were doing really well for themselves for a sickly girl and a mom who couldn't work because she was too busy taking care of her. As Gypsy started to turn 18, she kind of started to notice a few red flags around the house and, you know, the fact that she could fucking walk. She started to realize, hey, maybe my mom's full of shit and maybe we're lying to everybody, oopsies. It seems like she started to realize that every horrendously painful surgery, every unanesthetized feeding tube installation and removal, every unnecessary medication that she had to put in her mouth was just some big drama concocted by Deedee in order to get them more attention. It is speculated that Deedee had Munchausen by proxy syndrome or factitious disorder imposed on the other term for Munchausen by proxy syndrome. She was never officially diagnosed, although there was a doctor in 2007 who wrote in his notes, hey, I'm pretty sure she's suffering from this because this child seems right as rain, good to go. But unfortunately, she was murdered before anybody could figure out if she was actually certifiably suffering from Munchausen by proxy syndrome. Just a quick overview, essentially Munchausen by proxy is, quote, when somebody falsely claims that another person has a physical or psychological signs of symptoms or illness or causes injury or disease in another person with the intention of deceiving others, according to the Mayo Clinic. The disorder may be caused by a combination of psychological factors and stressful life experiences, including childhood trauma, serious childhood illness, loss of a loved one, or other conditions, unquote. According to a lot of Deedee's childhood family connections, she did have a pretty tumultuous childhood, but I can't really speak on it because I couldn't find a lot of information. If you know, please put it in the comments. I'd be really curious to read about it. But from what I understood, her mom seemed to be kind of a little turd toward Deedee, like Deedee was doing to Gypsy, just not nearly as intense of a scale. And she also, I don't know, stole a lot and just did petty dumb crimes like that. And Deedee said, oh, that sounds like fun, and learned and started doing that too. But that was the best I could really find about Deedee's upbringing and how that could have impacted her later in life and then in return in Gypsy's life. It also later came out that Deedee had an incredibly shady past where she would come up with all sorts of weird aliases. She would go by Deedee, Claudine, Dino. By the time they reached Missouri, she had slapped an E on the end of Blanchard, as if that's gonna do much. And it also came out that she was a big fan of writing bogus checks and petty theft. So naturally, because Gypsy's brain is starting to harden up, she's realizing, hey, wait, I can walk. I know I can walk. Why are we deceiving everybody? That's super weird. But she started to feel like even if she just got up out of the chair and started walking around, she'd either get her shit rocked by her mom or nobody would believe her. And it would kind of wind up being this big thing where it's like, oh, you knew the whole time and you were finessing everybody. So she was super worried about maybe the judgment or the consequences of everything, is kind of how I interpreted what she said. So she just sucked it up and dealt with it as best as she could. But back in her mind, she knew that something was off. And she was also kind of in the school of, okay, why would my mom do this for shits and giggles? Why would she subject me to extremely painful procedures? Why would she pull my salivary glands out, rot my teeth out of my head, force me to have dentures, force me to have a feeding tube, force me to get a muscle chunk taken out for a muscle biopsy for MS if it were for nothing? That doesn't make sense. That's not what a mom does. But it turns out Deedee was just a big old shithead and wanted to get all the attention and money and accolades from taking care of her daughter, apparently. And like I said, they had to take a muscle biopsy out of Gypsy in order to confirm her muscular dystrophy. It came back clean. She was fine, according to the doctors, but Deedee was like, no, not good enough, and she ran off and started essentially doctor hopping, which leads me to a quick aside. I just want to take a hot second and touch on the topic of advocating for yourself medically. So long story short, oh, you can't see, hold on. I had an open heart surgery. I'm not gonna get into it, but essentially I spent years and years and years knowing I was dying, feeling like I was dying, and I did have to not Dr. Hop, but it looked like Dr. Hopping, I'm so sure, in order to get someone to pay attention because I was so young. I was 25 when it happened, and my congenital heart defect was not supposed to escalate as quickly as it did. I was supposed to have to wait until I was 60 to get it replaced. Didn't happen, obviously. That being said, I'm sure it looked like I Dr. Hop. That's because no one was listening. So I do understand the necessity of getting a second and third opinion. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. And I don't want it to seem like I'm dragging people who are like, I need more than just two opinions. It's scary. And it's scary when you know you're dying, but nobody will listen to you. That is horrifying. It's an awful thing to go through. I can't even think about it too hard because I'll start crying. It was extremely traumatic. So I get it. I don't want this to seem like I'm tearing people apart who go from doctor to doctor to doctor to try and confirm. The problem is that Deedee knew better. She knew that her daughter didn't have anything wrong with her, allegedly, and she continued to force her daughter to suffer. And if anyone questioned her, she shut it down so quick. She was not open to negotiation. She was not open to any other perspective. It was her way or the highway, and that I don't agree with. And you know what? Maybe in her head, she did think that she was doing right by her daughter. She's not here anymore. So maybe she thought that she needed to get a second, third, fourth, fifth, 20th opinion. Be that as it may, I said my piece. I don't want it to seem like I'm shaming anyone who gets multiple opinions and people accused of doctor hopping because, like, you know something's wrong. I support you. Please don't think I'm being a dick about that. I'm just being a dick because Deedee is a dick, allegedly. So anyway, now that Gypsy was very quickly approaching adulthood, it became extremely clear that she had no idea what the fuck was going on. Her dad was super jazzed. His daughter's turning 18. His oldest kid, he's like, hell yeah. He had a back pocket full of dad puns about turning into an adult and celebrating this huge milestone for Gypsy. So he calls her up. Deedee intercepts it. Deedee is like, do not tell her she is turning 18. What is wrong with you? And Rod's like, well, what's wrong with you? She's turning 18. And Deedee's like, well, she has the mental capacity of a 14-year-old. You're gonna freak her out, so don't tell her. And Rod, being Rod, thinking that Deedee knows best because Deedee acts like she freaking knows best, is like, okay, well, I don't want to send our kid into a tailspin, so I guess. So he kept his mouth shut, and they just had a little conversation on her 14th birthday, and that was that on that. To give credit where credit is due, in 2007, there was a pediatric neurologist named Bernardo Blasterstein, and he had his suspicions, and he was a bad bitch about it. So off the jump, Deedee's like, Gypsy has MS, leukemia, going through the gambit of everything that Gypsy allegedly was suffering from, and the doctor's like, oh, that's so interesting, because it really doesn't seem like it, but sure, let's get her blood work, let's get her an MRI, let's just make sure you're not full of it. He gets everything back and is like, you're full of it. He ends up writing in his notes, quote, the mother is not a good historian, unquote. He seemed to be trying to at least take what Deedee was saying with a grain of salt. But what really did it for him was at one point he goes, hey, Gypsy, want to go ahead and stand up out of your wheelchair? And Gypsy, whoop, gets on up. Muscular dystrophy, who? So he looks at Deedee and he's like, why aren't you allowing her to walk? That's going to be beneficial for her. Let's build those muscles up. And she basically said, okay, bye. Left the appointment, never looked back. So then this doctor, bless his little heart, tried his darndest to figure out what the hell was going on. He reaches out to one of the doctors that Gypsy had seen in the past in Louisiana and was like, hey, what the hell? And the doctor's like, oh yeah, we did a muscle biopsy. Nothing's wrong, but Deedee didn't want to believe it. So then Bernardo in his notes wrote down, quote, analyzing all the facts and after talking to her previous pediatrician, there's a strong possibility of Munchausen by proxy with maybe some underlying unknown etiology to explain for her symptoms, unquote. So big fucking surprise, Deedee never saw him again, did not care. The doctor was later interviewed and to this day apparently still kicks himself for not being more aggressive with his pursuit of this entire situation. He knew something was wrong, like felt it in his bones, he could tell. But every single time he tried to approach a colleague to get some sort of guidance on the situation, essentially they would tell him, like, you need to handle this duo with golden gloves. They've been through so much. They were ruined by Katrina. Her daughter has XYZ disease. Like, what the fuck's wrong with you for questioning them? Shut your pie hole. So eventually it seemed useless to pursue it, so he just dropped it. But even with that on the record, in 2009, someone else, it was an unidentified person, tried to ring the alarm bells. Investigators show up to Deedee's house. They go in and they look at Gypsy. They see all the medical shit everywhere and they're like, ooh, this doesn't look good. So then Deedee goes into her whole diatribe on what's wrong with Gypsy, why she knows it, her background, kind of the woe is me deal. And they're like, hey, what's up with all these weird last names? What's up with all these weird birth dates for Gypsy? The math isn't mathing and you're looking a little suspicious right now. But Deedee had an explanation. She said that she was running from her abusive ex, allegedly Rod, and that she needed to change it up every so often in order to conceal her identity. And for the record, there's been absolutely no inkling that Rod was any sort of abusive or awful toward his daughter or his ex-wife or his current wife or their kids. He's a good dude. Let's just like come out and say that, according to everybody who's ever spoken on the topic. And the cops are like, oh shit, you're right. We're the assholes. Let's get out of here. No skin off your nose. Nothing's wrong. So then another year passes. Gypsy's 19. If you thought she was suspicious at 18, bitch, you have no idea. By 19, she's like, okay, something is wrong. What in the fuck? She started to realize that any stable relationship she'd ever had, aside from one, which was a girl named Aaliyah, who was one of the neighborhood girls who became one of the family friends, like her and her mom, aside from them, Gypsy really didn't have any stable relationships. When
Deedee and Gypsy
moved to the neighborhood, they were well liked.
Deedee
Would host these little movie nights with cheap concessions, and the kids had to pay for the concessions, but the money allegedly went toward Gypsy's surgeries and procedures and all that. They were kind of known as that family, and they kind of kept to themselves, but no one really complained about them, you know what I mean? But Gypsy's like, hey, why don't I have any friends? Why haven't I had a boyfriend? Why am I missing my fucking teeth? Why can't I walk? Because Gypsy at this point was getting up at night and wandering the house. She knew goddamn good and well she was fine. She just was afraid to say anything. And because she was homeschooled by the least responsible woman on the planet, Deedee, she didn't have any friends. Her mom wouldn't take her out on field trips or like to any of those homeschool groups where you can like, I don't know, make a friend who's also homeschooled. And Gypsy also started to realize that she had been completely isolated from her entire family and any sort of potential support network that she could have had. So then when Gypsy went to a sci-fi convention with her mom and a woman named Kim Blanchard, no relation, weird coincidence, she was off to the fucking races. She was so hyped. There was this 35-year-old man giving this 19-year-old woman attention. She'd never gotten that kind of attention before. She was good to go. So she slides in Aaliyah's DMs to have some like girly pop time with a girl who she viewed as her older sister. She was super jazzed on this guy and like really wanted to, I guess, more or less brag about the situation and just share this exciting thing that had happened to her. Keep in mind at this point, she's 15, according to everybody. That's the age Deedee had her frozen in time at. So her friend finds out that this man's 35 and she's like, so now from all outside appearances, including to Aaliyah, it looks like 15-year-old Gypsy is dating a 35-year-old man. It does not look good. But Gypsy was super ready for freedom, so she runs off to a hotel with this grown-ass man, and her mom manages to track her down because essentially everyone raised the alarm bells because, again, it looks like a 15-year-old girl is off with some crusty old 35-year-old man. So they're freaking out. Deedee finds Gypsy, knocks on the door, and immediately is like, hey, she's 15, what are you doing? The guy said, oh, bye. And he pushes Gypsy out, which, thank you for not being a big old creep. And he got the hell out of that situation. It was not good for Gypsy, though. Deedee went feral, smashed the family computer with a hammer, threatened to smash Gypsy's fingers with a sledgehammer, according to Gypsy, and also strapped Gypsy to the bed. And I think it was during this instance that she beat her with the coat hangers. Deedee also decided that it was high time to start installing bells all over the house. That way Gypsy couldn't sneak out anymore. And she essentially gaslit the entire neighborhood into thinking that Gypsy was just in her rebellious teen era, and that if they saw or heard anything sketchy or weird, like Aaliyah, who she was messaging on Facebook, they should probably tell her, because Gypsy, I mean, she's 7. She doesn't know what she's doing. She's not mature enough to handle this, so someone needs to tell me what's going on. After a while, Gypsy was able to get her grubby little paws on another laptop and a phone, and around October 2014, met a man named Nicholas Godejohn on a Christian dating site. He was 24, he was a fellow Catholic, and he knew exactly what to say to make Gypsy feel loved and appreciated and understood. It fully seemed like the fairy tale dream that Gypsy had wanted her entire life, but unbeknownst to her, Nicholas did have a bit of a background. He had been caught jacking it in a McDonald's while watching PORN, and also had a concealed weapon. He just had like a knife in his pocket or something. He got in trouble for that. That wasn't a good thing, so that was on his record for sure. And it also turned out that later during the trial, Nick was given an IQ test and he scored an 82. So like she had no idea any of this was going on behind the scenes, but it's kind of important in a second, so hold on to that. They fell hard and fast for each other, specifically because when Gypsy said stuff like, quote, "I need to tell you something, I'm no model. I have medical conditions, so I can't walk. I have to use a chair. Is that an issue?" Unquote. Nick would say stuff like, quote, "Why would that be a problem? You are an angel in my eyes. It will never make any difference in how I see you from the inside out." Unquote. This is her like second relationship, her second feeling of being appreciated and noticed. This got her going. So quickly they're talking about marriage. They're planning on naming their firstborn boy after Nicholas. They really were going to town when it came to the old romance section. And she, again, slid into Aaliyah's DMs. But for the last time, apparently after this conversation, they really didn't talk anymore on Facebook, which I thought was pretty interesting. But she was gushing about him. When she told Aaliyah that Nick was 24, Aaliyah's like, "Hi, you're like 16. Maybe tap the brakes, hun." Didn't stop Gypsy, obviously, or else we wouldn't be here. To Aaliyah's credit, she did try, thinking that Gypsy was underage. She did try to talk some sense into the bestie. So naturally, as time progresses, their bond deepens, and Nicholas starts to open up about a darker side to him. Apparently, he had multiple personalities in his head. One was some decades old vampire who lusted for blood. It was pretty dark, and Gypsy, according to her, thought it was pretty weird. She wasn't having the best time on the planet about it, but she wanted him to feel supported the same way she felt supported by him, and so she just kind of went along with it, and she started developing nicknames for herself or being given them by Nick, like Little Kitty, Candy, Ruby, and she would dress the part too. There are pictures of her in full BDSM cosplay. After talking for a while in 2015, they thought, perfect time, let's meet up. It's been a minute, and Gypsy really wanted to come out to her mom and show off her boyfriend, this man she loved that she had met online, and wanted her mom's approval and to not have to sneak around and feel so gummy about everything. So that was during the premiere of the live action Cinderella. She thought, perfect, fairy tale, let's get dressed up. He's gonna dress up as a little prince, and I'm gonna dress up in my little Cinderella getup, and we're gonna meet up and accidentally run into each other. We don't know each other, and I'm gonna introduce him to my mom. We're all gonna get to know each other, even though her and Nick had obviously already been talking. But unfortunately, Deedee did not let that for her. She got extremely jealous, according to Gypsy, and for the rest of the next few weeks would call Gypsy a bitch, a slut, a whore, throw things at her, just became extremely aggressive toward Gypsy because, God forbid, she gives someone else more attention than her for more than 5 minutes. But during this meetup, it turns out that Nick and Gypsy snuck away, and Gypsy ended up losing her virginity to Nick in the handicap stall at the theater. So I guess it wasn't all bad? I don't know. Depends on who you ask. As Gypsy became more comfortable with Nick, she started to really open up and tell him about the extreme abuse she was suffering at her mother's hands and about how she wasn't really sick. She didn't feel sick, at least, and her mom was being extremely suspicious at this point, and Gypsy was really starting to clock it. From there, it seems to have snowballed. They were really gassing each other up. Like, he was appalled at the way that Gypsy was being treated. Gypsy was like, yeah, and another thing. And you know how things just kind of devolve, like you and the bestie get together over some guy who fucked you over and soon you're putting kitty litter in his gas tank, shit like that. They really got each other going, but on a far more violent and aggressive and bloody trail than any sort of kitty litter in the gas pipe would lead to. So in mid-June of 2014, their plan that they had texted to each other about for the past few months finally came to fruition. That day, Gypsy texted Nick, quote, "The blank gonna go down tonight. Just the gloves and knife?" To which Nick responded, quote, "Duct tape too, to muffle her," unquote. And Gypsy, for her part, said that she was gonna go ahead and pre-cut the tape for him to make his life just a little easier. So Nick arranges a ride from Wisconsin to Missouri. He gets there late at night, well after Deedee and Gypsy are supposed to be asleep, and Gypsy goes to the front door, unlocks it, and sneaks Nick in. She says that she hid out in the bathroom, covering her ears, while Nick went into her mother's room while she was sleeping and stabbed stabbed her 17 times. All the while, her screams for Gypsy are getting more and more feeble. As the cries petered out, and Nick was sure that Deedee was dead, he found Gypsy, they went to her room, they had sex, and then moved into phase 2 of the plan. Quick sidebar, according to Gypsy, it was not consensual, so she said that Nick really wanted to R-word her mother, but Gypsy was like, no, she's dead, you don't need to do all that, you're doing the most right now. How about you R-word me and we can just leave my mother out of this? So apparently that was the deal they struck, according to Gypsy, and who am I to say that that's not true? I just thought I'd share that perspective. So Gypsy and Nick flee the house with $4,000 that they had taken from Deedee. They mailed the cash and the murder weapon for whatever fucking reason to Nick's house in Wisconsin, caught a cab, and got the hell out of there. They wound up at a local motel where they ate some brownies and made like a super weird home video to celebrate Gypsy's freedom.
Hi, honey. I'm feeling it. He's eating a brownie. But later he will be eating me.
It was a little bit funny because later on the taxi driver was interviewed and he said that Gypsy got in the car looking like she had an old looking Cher wig and, quote, looked 12, sounded 5, and had a 40-year-old attitude. She was not afraid to tell me off. I just knew there was something wrong, unquote. Kind of irrelevant. I just thought it was a little bit funny, so I wanted to throw it in. Once they wind up at Nick's house in Wisconsin, Gypsy gets immediately on the computer and she's worried. She thinks no one's gonna find her mom, at least not for a while. And it's the middle of summer, it's gonna get stank nasty in there. So she thought, okay, let me get on Facebook on our joint account and I'm gonna post this. Quote, the bitch is dead. And then she posted a second post that said, quote, I fucking slashed that fat pig and raped her sweet innocent daughter. Her scream was so fucking loud, LOL, unquote. And that, I mean, it did the trick. Neighbors were alarmed, family was alarmed. Deedee's friends wasted no time calling the cops for a wellness check, but they had to wait for the warrant, but that didn't mean the neighbor didn't want to break in, so a neighbor wound up busting into the house because they're worried. They think that Deedee is there and she's dead, and that Gypsy is either dead or kidnapped and gone. So he breaks in and he finds Deedee dead, stabbed, face down, just in a pool of her own blood, and Gypsy is nowhere to be found. So now they're really freaking out because this is clearly an extremely violent crime that took place. For a few days, Nick and Gypsy were able to hide out in his house, and his dad was later on freaked out a little bit because I guess Nick and Gypsy were acting cool as cucumbers. Like nothing was wrong at all. Nobody clocked that they had just murdered someone and helped murder someone in Gypsy's case. So like, yeah, he was a little perturbed when he figured that out later. But because the Facebook posts were made within Nick's house, the IP address was traced and SWAT very quickly surrounded the house. There was like a 5-minute long standoff where Nick was like, no, with his little knives, but he gave up pretty quick. They got arrested, and then they were taken in for interrogation. From the start, things did not smell right for investigators. For example, when Gypsy was caught, she immediately said, yep, I'm 19. Come to find out, at this time, she's 23. She just had no idea because Deedee had lied to her. They were able to figure it out because Rod and Christy wound up with the birth certificate, and they're like, she's 23. So just be aware. I don't know what's going on, but that's not her age. And now I'm a little concerned. There are a ton of videos on YouTube about the interrogation of Gypsy Rose Blanchard and Nick Godejohn. So I'll link the video below of both Nick and Gypsy's interrogation, but essentially cops weren't fucking around. They kind of went in full force on Gypsy and were like, hey, how you doing, sweetie? So your mom's dead. And her reaction was just grade A Oscar-worthy acting, but it didn't fool the cops. The investigator says something along the lines of, hey, sweetie, you need to be honest. Your mom was dead. And he keeps talking, and Gypsy puts her hand out, and she's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. What do you mean my mom's dead? And he's like, okay, cut the shit, drop the act. We know. She folded pretty quick. Both her and Nick, wet napkins, folded on over. He was super forthcoming about it, and he was like, yes, I did that. I did it because I thought I was saving her and rescuing Gypsy from this horrible situation. I don't see what's wrong. He knew he was in trouble, but it was kind of like one of those for the greater good things. So I think he was just stuck in this headspace of, what's wrong? She was being a bad person. She was abusing her daughter. I just did what I thought was right. So it's kind of sad because you see his interrogation, and in my opinion, the way it presents is he's like, yes, I know I fucked up and I need to do some sort of time, but I did what I thought was right. And like, I genuinely wonder if he thought that he would get as much time as he did. Despite cracking immediately, Gypsy still tries to shift all of the blame onto Nick and was like, I didn't want him to do it. Not ready to take accountability in that moment. Eventually she does come around, but like that day she said, fuck to the no, I'm not doing that. And she tried to pin pretty much all of it on Nick in that moment, whereas poor Nick is like, oh yeah, I did that for sure. Not really blaming Gypsy for anything. It was a very interesting dichotomy. Like, I do recommend you go and watch those interrogations if you have the time, because they're kind of long. So all in all, it really seemed extremely cut and dry at first. But that was until investigators discovered Deedee's extreme levels of abuse that she put Gypsy through. And even during a press conference, one of the lead investigators starts everything by saying,
"Things are not always as they appear."
But despite that, both Gypsy and Nick were charged with first-degree murder in that moment. Interestingly, Gypsy thrived when she was in prison. When she first met her lawyer, he was saying that from the 75 yards from the elevator to the room where he first talked to her, she was winded, she was out of breath, she looked like she was about to tip on over, super pale and frail. And while she was in prison, during her first year, she was able to gain the appropriate 14 pounds to get her from malnourished, because she was living off of feeding tube Pedialyte for 23 years. She was not doing well. And he said that she was the only client that he's ever had to fully thrive while in prison, got her color back, stopped being so frail. It turned out to be actually extremely intelligent and extremely friendly and bubbly and outgoing when given the opportunity to thrive and really come into her own. During the trial, there were a few interesting texts that were uncovered that shed a little more light on the situation that I want to just real quick go over. For example, one time Nick texts Gypsy and says, quote, "Honey, you forget I am ruthless, and my hatred of her will force her to die. It is my evil side doing it. He won't mess up because he enjoys killing." Unquote. And allegedly, investigators were able to uncover specifically a text of Gypsy asking him, under no uncertain circumstances, to kill her mom. So it seemed pretty obvious that she was the mastermind, he was just the muscle. Because of all the abuse, Gypsy wound up being able to enter a plea of second-degree murder, with the minimum sentence being 10 years, and eligible for probation at 8. So the judge essentially took leniency on her because Gypsy had suffered her entire life. She'd been a prisoner for 23 years. She did her time.
I also wanted to quickly point out that Gypsy was under a conservatorship thanks to Deedee. So, in my opinion, that makes escape that much more difficult. Why would anybody believe such a sickly young girl who is saying she is being abused by her mother?
But Nick, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. He was given a life sentence for first-degree murder, and I do have a few thoughts on that. It sucks because his IQ is 82. As bad as it sounds, you can kind of tell just by his speech patterns that maybe the lights are on, but not everybody in the family is home. And he was more or less taken advantage of, be it Gypsy did it intentionally or didn't necessarily realize how she was manipulating him because of how she was raised. I don't know. I wasn't there. But also I can see that if he was so easily manipulated in that moment, could that happen again? Yes, he didn't have a violent past, but could he murder for love again? And I feel like it's such a big risk to take. Is it worth it? Let me know what you think in the comments below, because genuinely I'm so curious to know if you think that's a rehabilitatable personality trait, or if he's willing to really do whatever for love, and this is probably the best decision to keep him behind bars for his own safety and everyone else's. What do you think? So now, the reason we're here. Gypsy has been let out on parole as of December 28th, 2023. TikTok screamed. It was the best. People were freaking out. It was so fun. She was picked up by her husband, Ryan Anderson, who she married from prison on July 21st, 2022. And I guess they had met because apparently a buddy was like, oh, I really want to message the Tiger King, but I don't know, I'm nervous or something. And so Ryan was like, okay, bet. If you send a letter to Tiger King, I'll send a letter to Gypsy Rose Blanchard. And so they both did it. Ryan really just like opened up about himself because in his head, she's not answering. What the fuck does it matter? Who cares? But she did answer. And it did matter. And that's how their love story blossomed into what it is today. It should be noted that Gypsy has expressed literally nothing but remorse for her mom and regret for murdering her, saying stuff like, quote, "I was so desperate to get out of that situation. Nobody will ever hear me say that I'm glad she's dead or I'm proud of what I did. I regret it every single day. She was a sick woman, and unfortunately, I wasn't educated enough to see that. She deserved to be where I am, sitting in prison, doing time for criminal behavior," unquote. She also talked about how she still loves her mom, but recognizes that Deedee was suffering from something that was kind of akin to an addiction, and Gypsy seems to feel like it was more or less out of Deedee's control. So it's kind of her way of coping is by just giving her mom extreme grace and empathy and trying to understand, like, okay, it wasn't her fault. Whether or not it was, that's not the point. For Gypsy, it was an addiction, and this is how she copes. And we're just gonna have to all get right with that, okay? Luckily, there doesn't seem to be any sort of long-term effect as far as Gypsy's health goes. Her family also doesn't really care that Deedee's gone. They're sad because a life was lost, but they were like, A, we didn't really know her, and B, when we did know her, she was kind of a shit, so like, thank God Gypsy's safe, kind of deal. Gypsy, while in prison, got her GED, studied photography, and had the opportunity to get a really close bond with her dad, her stepmom, her siblings, and all of the extended family. So, a happy ending? I guess? I don't know. What do you guys think? I'd love to know your opinion on this case. I feel like it was such a divisive case when it first came out, but now my generation and younger, we're all like, go Gypsy. There are a lot of people in her corner, and I do agree with what she said, where she should not have done that. Her mom should be in prison, but she should still be alive. But I can't even begin to put myself in that situation in order to think about what I would do. I can't even begin to think about how awful it would be. It just doesn't click. I've already kind of given my opinion. I've already kind of spoke on it the entire time, putting my 2 cents in every which way on every opportunity. I'd just love to know what you guys think. Thank you so much for joining me. This one was a doozy. Hi Gypsy, I'm glad you're out, and I hope you stay safe, and I hope that you can fulfill your dream of having kids. I'm glad you already got step 1 of your dream, which is that husband. If you guys liked this case, give me case suggestions down below. Comment, subscribe if you decided that you liked it. If I've earned that subscription, please subscribe. It means a lot. I'm excited. I'm already up to 287 subscribers, which to me is like a lot. That's the world. So I'm very excited that 267 people give a fuck about what I have to say, and I appreciate you all. I'll see you guys next time. Keep your little noggins on a swivel. Goodbye.